Joined now by Max Hofmeyer of ShotQuality Bets. Make sure if you're watching this interview on YouTube, you subscribe to the YouTube channel. Plenty more content here as we get through March. But Max, great to see you. Great to talk to you today. Great to have you on the Rebound Rundown. And I think what I want to do on this show is give people an idea as we get into conference tournament week this week and then the NCAA tournament coming up next week. All these major conference tournaments, there are so many games going on. You have games all day long. And you are somebody that does this, as you say, it's not a hobby. This is a profession, and this is something that you do very, very well. For people that follow you on Twitter, you already know this, and for people that are just learning about you, you are one of the best in the game. You're great at what you do here with trying to find some edges and trying to find people ways to make money on college basketball. And I figured going into the tournament and with so much craziness, I think a lot of times people might just find their way to the sport, or they might get overwhelmed. There's so many games happening. They just start throwing things at the board and hoping something sticks. But there is a way to do this where you can at least give yourself a shot. And that's why I wanted to bring you on here today. So for people that are going into this conference tournament and maybe want to give themselves an extra reason to watch, let's talk about it, Max. And I'll open the floor to you as we get into conference tournament week this week by asking you what you're looking for, how you can maybe find an edge this week, how to attack a week like this.
Yeah. So for people that may not be familiar with me, I work at ShotQuality Bets, and what we do at ShotQuality is we want to identify not just the box score analytics, but the process, right? Because if somebody makes a super contested three, it's going to show up as a made three, but we identify a point value depending on if it was an open look or a contested look, because the more open looks you generate, typically it's going to result in success. So what I'm doing now in the conference tourney is we've got two games, a sample size of them playing head-to-head typically twice in the regular season. I want to look at what happened and what was expected to happen. So taking, that shot quality score and maybe, say a team A beat team B twice, but we might have had them expected to lose twice. Now that's something that is pretty specific to, our platform. So if you don't, have the data and you can't use it, another thing I'm looking for in conference tourneys is I want to know motivation, right? Like if you think about what Kansas and Bill Self has done for years, they always would win the regular season, right? But that typically wouldn't mean they would go on to win the Big 12 tournament because they've already got one seeds locked up. So what I'm looking at is the top five teams like Auburn, teams like Duke, those guys, Houston, those are teams where, they're going to win probably their first conference tournament game, maybe their second, but at some point the motivation, they just don't need it as much. Like think Houston last year ended up making the conference tournament, right? In the championship in the Big 12. They played an Iowa State team who's kind of the new guys on the block. They were way more motivated. Houston was kind of banged up. They just wanted to get ready for the tourney. Iowa State rolls them by, I think it was almost 30 points. So I'm looking for motivation. Team like I think Auburn could be that this year. They might win a game or two, and then say you run into like a Texas A&M, a hungry team to win the SEC. So motivation is one of the key points here for conference tourney season.
How do you manage so many games throughout the day?
That is a great question. It does help that they start in the day because they are spaced out. And now we've eliminated, we're already punching tickets. So there's less and less games every day. It is a lot of work, but like tonight, it's just, a couple of games, nothing crazy. It's not like we just had our last 100 games Saturday slate. So it's a little more concise, and people might still be overwhelmed, but it's definitely way more overwhelming during the regular season.
So when you're looking at the conference tournaments versus the NCAA tournament next week, right? Obviously motivation, very different when you get to the NCAA tournament because your entire season's on the line when you're talking about the conference tournament. And I think you bring up a great point about the conference tournament because I think there is also an argument to be made for teams that bow out early of their conference tournament that already know they're going to play next week, that they get that extra day or two of rest And a lot of times you'll see these power conference teams that win their conference tournaments that are elite teams. I mean, obviously you have NC State last year that won 5 games in 5 days, went to the Final Four. This is not a rule, but there are definitely examples of teams that win their conference tournament and then run out of juice in the next week. So as you transition from conference tournament week to the NCAA tournament, are there things that you look at differently? Are there different strategies going into? I know that everybody in the world is betting the NCAA tournament on Thursday and Friday. So what are some of the strategies you're looking for?
Yeah, the one that you mentioned is true typically, but last year was a rare year because not just NC State, like you mentioned, Illinois won the Big Ten and ended up going on a run. Eventually, they ran the UConn in the Elite Eight, I think. But yeah, that's typically one I want to look at. I think you got to find out like what's your main goal? Like, is your main goal just entertainment purposes? Like, I just want to have fun, put down a couple wagers. If that's for you, one of the things that like I've started to get people on is just take $5, bet every underdog from 15 seed down. Maybe not the 16 seeds. I that's pretty rare. 15 seeds and down, put $5 on all of them, and then you just have fun and you just root for nothing but underdogs every day. You might run into losing 5-6 in a row, but it just takes one Jack Golke in Oakland to upset Kentucky, and then you're getting 6-7 units back on that one. So that's just a fun strategy. Typically, when I'm betting spreads and totals, I am looking at unders and underdogs. And every year, these underdog, like people know, the books know underdogs are going to hit in March Madness, and they still, they'll even move the point spread maybe down a point or two, and they still come home. So if you're betting those spreads, you're taking a team plus 6.5. Make sure you put a little on the money line too, because a lot of the time when they do cover, they end up winning. So I typically take, if I'm betting, I'll take 80% of it, put it on the spread, 20%, put a little on the money line as well to win outright. One last thing I like to do is first half unders. I typically like to take those because you normally get two very unfamiliar opponents. Maybe you start out a little slow, jitters, whatever reason. The first half is kind of like a feeling out process. You don't have to worry about late game fouling because if a team's down 12 in March Madness, they might keep fouling to stay in it, which would ruin your under. Whereas in the regular season, you just kind of give up. So first half unders is something I like to play as well.
I was thinking about this last night and some of the things that I remember from last year and going in even into years past. You mentioned the unders, and this happened to Marquette last year, and it became more public. I mean, it was something that if you're around the sport, you kind of realize, but it became more public last year because somebody picked up on it and it went viral. They use Wilson basketballs in the NCAA tournament as opposed to conference tournaments or whatever the school is sponsored by. Sometimes they'll use them in a conference tournament, but in general, the NCAA tournament as a sponsorship, they use Wilson basketballs. Well, a Wilson basketball in the NCAA tournament, this is going to sound crazy, and some people listening to this might say I'm stupid, but the data bears itself out that teams shoot worse with these overinflated basketballs in the NCAA tournament, and it's not necessarily a knock on Wilson. It's just for some reason that these Wilson balls that they use are consistently overinflated, and teams that typically shoot well, a lot of times when they get to the tournament, it happened to Marquette last year. It happened in the whole Dallas regional last year, that teams were just shooting way under their percentages for the season.
Yeah, and like you said, it might sound crazy, and I kind of read it last year, and I'm like, oh, this does kind of sound crazy. And then I watched it. It's not just the shooting. They're like dribbling the ball and turning it over too. And if you're turning it over, you're not generating a shot, and that's great for unders. You want those turnovers, missed shots. And another point is who does that help? It helps the teams that win games like St. John's and Michigan State, where they're already not great shooting teams. And the way to beat those teams is, you get like a 40% team from three. But if you don't have to worry about that, St. John's and Michigan State, they're just going to grind you out. They're going to offensive rebound, just, pummel you basically. So I totally forgot about the Wilson basketball. So that's something, yeah, we'll have to monitor as well coming up.
It's crazy when you walk into a tournament game and you even just hear the sound of the balls bouncing. Everything just sounds harder, and you just know immediately when you're in attendance that you're going, something seems a little off here. But maybe they fix it for this year. Who knows? But yeah, go ahead. Were you going to say something?
Yeah, and not only that, but when you get to the Final Four, they're playing in football stadiums, and that's also an adjustment as well. So I typically target unders in those games as well, but that's a little later down the line.
All right, let's talk about some specifics here, Max. We'll start with conference tournament week, and then we can get to the NCAA tournament after that. But starting with conference tournament week, are there specific teams? Are there specific sides you're looking at? Is there anything that catches your eye here? Again, this is going to air on Wednesday. We're recording this on Monday, so a couple of the major conference tournaments will have already started. But just anything that you're keeping an eye on?
Yeah, so I kind of like momentum going into tournament. What does a team look like right now at this second? And I don't think there's a better example of two teams going in opposite directions than Marquette and Xavier. So that is a line that I'm going to be absolutely intrigued and watching, because KenPom right now, and the sports books usually start at KenPom like as a baseline, maybe make a few adjustments either way. Right now they have Marquette by 4, and that feels more like a pick 'em, closer to maybe a 2-point spread. So that will be one that I'm looking to grab Xavier, because not only did Xavier win their last 4 games, but I talked about those shot quality scores. They had them winning the shot quality score in all of those games as well. Marquette, they're just not shooting the ball as well. They're shooting 31% from deep in conference play on an expected 33, so they're supposed to be doing a little better, but still 33% for Marquette. And like you talked about that team last year that was just very elite shooting, and they've dropped a couple in a row, so something like that. I like to look at recent performance because, yeah, momentum is a big thing. You can't take – and one of those games that they played was without Fremantle. So you can't take a team in – you can't just look at a team from November to today. You got to really factor in recent performance as well. And I'm sure there's other examples like that for other conferences too.
Anything futures, anything you're looking at in the NCAA tournament?
Yeah, I don't know exactly when this team first plays and when this airs, so they may get eliminated. But one of the big ones I took was Rutgers 300-1 to win the Big Ten, because that's another motivation one. They play open gym defense in the regular season. They have 2 NBA guys, Ace Bailey and Dylan Harper. They're already playing NBA defense. They're not even really, doing much. So, but with a conference, with an NCAA tournament on the line, maybe you turn it up. The motivation, the stakes are higher. You never know. I mean, you got 2 top 5 NBA guys. Anything could happen. They could take over and possibly – and their path would be USC, Purdue, and Michigan. And Purdue and Michigan are 2 teams that are really struggling. So, maybe you get lucky, you get through those games, and then you can look to hedge in the later on in the tournament.
One other team to ask you about, Baylor?
I did grab Baylor 50-1. I still think they're so much better than their record. And part of it is, it's taking what actually happened, what expected to happen. We have this Baylor team expected to be so much better, but I'm just starting to get to the point where if it hasn't happened yet, I'm worried it might not happen. One team, and I talked about this, was that NC State team. If I came on this time last year and said NC State was going to win the ACC, you would have ran me out of town and said, what the hell are you talking about? The Villanova team kind of reminds me of that team. Villanova, they have talent, and Kevin Keats was not a good coach. He got fired. That's why they moved on. Neptune, I do not think is a good coach. But what if Dixon, what if Wooga Popular just kind of take over? You never know. I mean, it's March. Literally anyone can win. So I did sprinkle some Villanova to win the Big East as well.
It's funny, you're not the only person to say that, because Mike LaTulip, who's part of the Field of 68, who I had on the show last Friday, he gave the exact same answer on the show about that. He gave the exact they had a whole discussion on the show I think Saturday night about what team fits that mold, and it's like, well, you have the nation's leading scorer in Eric Dixon, you have some guards that can maybe make some plays, you have a bracket that sets up probably as favorably as it could for Villanova, for a team that's really struggled this year. So yeah, who knows? All right, Max, I do want to backtrack just real quick to finish this up. you talked all about shot quality and how it works. I think it's really interesting, even for people that don't subscribe to the data. You tweet out a lot of screenshots from your Twitter account of the expected score versus the actual score. And you'll do a lot of tweets like this at halftime where maybe a team's winning 35-30, but they should actually be losing 40-28 because they've thrown a bunch of shots in the basket that maybe they shouldn't have hit a bunch of those shots. Here's what the expected score based on how well they attempt or how good their shot attempts were. I just find that data really interesting, and for you to be able to find an edge in that in this space, it's really intriguing to me.
Yeah, especially live betting, I think, is where it has the biggest edge because, pregame betting, a sports book posts their line, they have 24 hours to make adjustments, either way. Live betting, that's just right in the heat of the moment. If you can find value, you can pick it off. Like, I know on Monday, that late night, there was a San Francisco-Washington State game. It was a 2-point game at half, but San Francisco took like 12 more shots. They're killing them on the glass. They just couldn't make anything. Well, they end up coming out, win the game by 11. So we're always looking for, it's not just quality of shots, like generating more shots. I mean, then your team, eventually they usually do fall in. So live betting is something that I spend a lot of time doing. And yeah, I tweet them. And then the ShotQuality Bets account, you can follow them as well. They tweet them too. And we do our live shows. So it's something worth checking out because it does kind of change your perspective on basketball.
Max, where can people follow you on Twitter and find your work?
Yeah, on Twitter, I'm at Hoffy8121. Yeah, like you said, I'm always tweeting out useful stuff, hopefully useful stuff. So join us, join ShotQuality Bets, and check us out, and let's have a fun March.
Appreciate it, Max. Thanks for taking a few minutes today.
Absolutely, this was fun.